Welcome to the shop. I am fortunate that I get to assemble a lot of planes. And while assembling them or tweaking them and doing different things during that build/assembly process, I find that there's just a lot of techniques and things that I do, and I want to share those with you. More on the what happens when things go wrong. For example, you put this fuselage together and the holes don't line up properly. The screw's not going in. What do? Talk about that. You're going to swap out some wheels. And you get the different wheel, but the axles are different sizes and there's too much play. How do you resolve that? Servos go bad. Things happen. What do I do for organizing the battery bay? I mean, I go into all kinds of stuff. I will make chapters for everything. And I'll have links in the description below for all the tools and things that I use. So if you have any questions about any of it, please leave a comment. If there's a tip or something you do different that maybe I missed, love to hear about it. And of course, if you like these kind of videos, hit that like button. It helps me out, helps the channel grow. Appreciate it. Stick around. Let's talk about all the tools and pieces and parts that I use. First, the bench itself. Obviously, I've got one of these cutting boards here, which is nice because they clean up well. Always have also a chunk of foam because as I'm mashing on it and pushing on it or screwing things in, the foam just protects this foam protects this foam or whatever material you're working with. Does a good job of that. The other thing I will do at some point is use one of these stands. There's a lot of different versions of it. A friend of mine, John Anderson, he makes these. There'll be a link in the description below. It's an STL file. He 3D prints it and then uses PVC. Anyway, it's kind of a neat stand. I've used that on a couple things when I want a nice low type of stand. So let me walk through some of the assortments of tools that I have on hand. Here I have just an assortment of different X-Acto knives, X-Acto saws, paint markers. I love these little paint markers because they will write on anything and they stand out. I have one in white, one black. Standard utility knife. And this little guy who is perfect for just grabbing little wires that I'm trying to sort and kind of deal with. Then I've got my clothespins for tying off wires or clamping, and larger ones for other sorts of clamping. In this bin, I've got, this is just my collection of all kinds of stuff. So, I've got a mini adjustable wrench for prop nuts, screwdriver, one of 25 screwdrivers, toothbrush for cleaning stuff off, flashlight, because sometimes you got to look in there to find a hole or something. This guy I use all the time for when holes don't align and I can basically chew away a little bit of the hole when you're trying to put like a wing on a fuselage and the holes just don't align. This right here is key to get those things to work properly. I've got my cool alligator clips for reaching in and pulling something out. Nice set of cutters, only used for cutting wire and or little pieces. Drill bits. Now, that's in another container, but I've got various drill bits for my hand drill, which, man, I use this thing all the time. It's fantastic. All right, so then we have different tapes. We've got some Blenderm tape and some white tape. Usually the only reason why I use this white tape is for writing the battery, the CG position, and things of my planes. And then Blenderm is just all-purpose. You could use it for just about everything. Markers, zip ties, dowels for poking things, carbon fiber rods that are leftovers that I might use for reinforcing, assortment of glues from Foam Tack, Yoo-Hoo Pour, Gorilla Clear, whatever I have laying around. Sandpaper. I go through little pieces of sandpaper all the time, and sandpaper on a little stick, and then my rulers. I think that sums it up. Oh, these hotel cards that I have, I'll use these sometimes as scrapers and or reinforcing when I'm clamping to spread the load. And then we got this guy here where you got, I will say that these screwdrivers. It's a special kind of Phillips. I can't remember it, but it is, I want to say JIN. It's like a Japanese fitting or whatever. I don't know. There'll be a link in the description below on that screwdriver. Then I have forceps, other screwdrivers, and this has been kind of a glue that I use for all purpose lately. Made by the same company that makes foam tag beacon. It doesn't hold as well, but for some things it's perfect, and a little bit more viscous, and it's big bottle and cheap. That's pretty much it. I have this little guy here for opening up boxes and cutting tape, and then a catch-all over here of just a little tray. So as I get all of my screws, all of my parts, I like to keep them all on one nice neat little tray. 3D printed that thing. There you go. Oh, let's talk about these. So I've got a wow stick, which works okay. It doesn't have a lot of power, but you can get all these little bits, and they're pretty handy for some things. Sometimes when you need a little bit more power, you got this, the Amazon Basics. And the cool thing about it is you can also buy this little bit, which then enables you to use those wow stick bits, which is kind of handy sometimes when you need a little bit more power. Then I have these guys, which are your standard. I've had these. I've got multiple pairs. One I bring to the field and one that's always on near the bench. And they come in multiple sizes there, from I think 1.5 millimeter up to 3 millimeter. All right, so that's all the tools that I'm grabbing as I'm assembling. Super handy tool. This is specifically made for ball links. It has a little stud right there and has this little clip. We have a ball link here. I'm going to put that stud, and that's going to basically end up going over the, I'm not sure if you can see that well, but that's going to go where the screw is. And then when you press it together, hard to get this on film, but here we go. And it pops off the ball link. And you can adjust it, do whatever you need, and push it back on. Or sometimes it's too hard to push on, and I will reverse it, have the stud on the other side, and try to push that onto place with ball link pliers. These are good ones. These, I don't know where I got them. I think I got these from Horizon Hobby Blade, and they're very, very thin. There's another version out, which I don't care for as much. I can't find it. You'll see them, they have a yellow handle, and they're much thicker. These are by far the best I've used. I use a host of different glues, adhesives, whether it's epoxy, which I don't use very often, but there's certain application that this works well. I like the West Systems G-Flex. It has some flexibility. CA, frankly, I don't use it a whole lot. I know a lot of people do, but I find that when it gets brittle, on foam planes particularly, it's not that great. This is made by the same company that makes foam tag, and I've used it. It doesn't work, it doesn't hold as strong as foam tack, but almost. And it comes in a big tube, easy to use, little more liquidy. Viscosity is different. E6000 is kind of a fantastic glue for all kinds of things. It will, if you apply it too much on EPO, it will kind of melt the foam a little. You put this on EPS and it'll eat right through it. And then some Gorilla Glues, the clear and the white. This is a polyurethane which expands, so you can fill holes with it. Pretty handy for doing repairs. For new assemblies, not so much. This one either. I don't use this a whole lot, but it does dry clear, and it kind of holds up well. It's okay. I don't use it very often, though. Anyway, and everybody's going to say, where's your hot glue? Use this for areas where I can't clamp anything, and I need a quick fix. Let's say to attach a servo into a foam plane. A couple dabs of this goes right in. The nice thing about this, denatured alcohol will remove that glue like that. That's a big plus for the hot glue. That's about the only reason why I use it though. Anyway, that's my glue assortment. Since I've been making these planes, or assembling these planes I should say, for a while, I've just created a bulk amount of everything that I might need. From these E-clips, which clearly you get an assortment. This won't be used very often, but a lot of the smaller ones absolutely are. Also, a lot of different screws. Every time you get a plane, you get extra screws. Not every time, but mostly. So, kind of identifying those in my shop. Grub screws. Wee little tiny itty bitty little screws. Cute little things. They're super small. Larger wood screws, which are pretty common, required a lot. Round magnets, which I use for doing all kinds of different things. Specialty self-tapping screws. These are really nice. Very high, much higher quality than some of the stuff you get. I get these either from Amazon or some other places. There's some specialty places for fasteners. M2, 3, and 4 screws. I use those all the time on planes, on assembling. Just to kind of give you an idea of some of the hardware I have laying around. So when I lose a grub screw or a E-clip, I have something close by that I can use instead of struggling and getting ticked off. Here's an example of, and this is just a small portion of my props that I get, whether it's APCs, some of the stock ones I swap out, nice wood props. Had some that are, extra parts for prop adapters, just things that I keep on hand because eventually I'm going to need them. So APC, Aeronaut, all good quality stuff. Zor, Gemfan, a lot of different manufacturers of different sizes, because there are times where, a prop, that comes stock, well, they're not very good. And you want to swap that out or maybe boost it a little bit or bring it down. So just depending, some options there that I always have a whole bunch of props on hand. Sometime you're going to run into a situation where you need a Y cable or an extension. And I tell you what, I have it happen all the time where it's just a lot easier to use an extension or a Y cable than try to manipulate or mess with what comes in the kit. There's different quality ones. Some of them are nice. You can make them yourself if you'd want. There's kits where you can buy and the pieces and parts and the tools to make these, which I also have because it sure is handy to make my own sometimes. Anyway, and then the other thing is I have a little label maker that I use often for making the labels. Just keep things organized in the plane. But anyway, just thought that'd be kind of neat to show. Tires, wheels. So many times I replace the wheels and axles for something a little better. Some of these come from other planes that I've removed and I just don't know what to do with them or take them off or whatever. But I do have quite the assortment of gear and stuff. It just keep things on hand. Very important tool, servo tester. A couple reasons. One is if you wanted to troubleshoot if you had a problem with a servo. Mine is set up that I have a power supply, a battery, an ESC that plugs into here, and then this plugs into the servos I'm testing. And I can turn this dial and make sure, the servos are working properly. When assembling a plane, I want to make sure that the servos are neutralized by having it, and I have a mode switch that'll take it right to 1500, and now I know the servos are neutralized and the control surfaces should also be neutral. They should be perfect. If not, I have to make mechanical adjustments. Or I do that on my planes after they're ready to go before I put all of the control rods on, just to make sure I know that the control surfaces are nice, neutral, and the way they should be. It'll make your maidens a lot better. you can never have too many servos. A servo is going to fail in your plane. They just are. Sometimes you can go out and buy the appropriate stock servo from FMS or from E-flite or whomever. Other times you might have a crashed airplane that has a Spectrum A334 in it, and you have one from a crashed airplane that you've taken all the pieces off of. It is a great asset to have extra servos laying around. Word of caution, there are some manufacturers where they're basically reversed. Now, some of them, Spectrum and FMS, and some will have an R, or actually a reverse sticker on them, or a label in their serial number or their model number R, indicating it's a reverse servo. That's important. But but this right here is just to let you know that, oh, this probably came out of an A10 I crashed. This is just to let you know, hey, when you have this pile of servos, a lot of times these servos are going to really help you when your plane you're assembling, the servo's not working and you got to swap it out, and you don't want to wait 2 weeks for the manufacturer to send one to you. All right, let's go into a couple assembly issues.
Very often I run into this where the holes don't quite align, meaning, you slide the two pieces together, you look inside, or you put a screw in and it's just not biting. So a couple things I do. One is I'll either make the hole a little wider so I have a little wiggle room with that screw, because I don't want to cross thread those screws. The brass knurl, threaded piece in there isn't the best quality. Taking a file and widening the hole a little bit, that's one way to do it. Sometimes pressuring, like in this case, the wing. I'm pulling on one side of the wing, pulling on the fuse to get those holes to align. And then there's this way, where you kind of just manhandle that screw into place.
You can see through that hole and see that it is not perfectly aligned. I can see it right here. It's kind of at an angle backwards. If it's not too severe, it is very easy to slightly angle your screw as you're threading it in and hoping that it bites, and this one did. So it's biting, I'm tightening it up, and there we go. Whether gluing foam to foam or plastic to foam, prepping the material is super important. And so what I typically do is use a little alcohol to clean everything off, and then I use sandpaper or even an X-Acto knife to scrape up the foam or scrape up the plastic. Gives it something, the glue, something to adhere to. A lot of these plastics also, they're kind of slippery, and so roughing them up really ensures that glue is going to get a good bond. The glues that I use, you don't need to use a ton of it. You shouldn't have a lot of squeeze out. I'll put on a decent amount and then use a brush, a little paintbrush, to spread it around. I do that on both surfaces and it gets a solid bond. I'm using small carbon fiber rods often to reinforce some of these flimsy foam parts, like this tail section where I just shove that rod down the tail at an angle and now it's a little bit more sturdy. Servos fail, and it's just part of the deal. Some of them are not best quality. So in this particular case, order a new servo, but realize it is a pain to run those cables. So I'm going to solder it. Simple process. It's basically a matter of cutting the old one out, getting those wires stripped, which are tricky, and exposing those ends. Sliding on the shrink wrap, don't forget that part. Now you're going to take that brand new servo wire and snip it and do the same thing, get those wires ready for solder. A lot of different methods. I like to spread out the wires, individual wires, mesh them together and kind of, twirl them, then solder. Makes a nice strong joint, works well. And then shrink wrap or heat shrink them. This one gets glued into place, so a little prepping with some sandpaper to rough it up. Apply quality adhesive, stick it in place, make sure it's all set up properly, and then do a final test, and you're done. Swapping out servos is just something you're gonna have to do. Now a handful of setup tips. Your wings are attached, but you got to be careful here if you have flaps. If your flaps are connected and your flap and your transmitter is reversed, then it could push those flaps and break the hinges.
it's different for a lot of different planes, but I've got in the habit of removing the control rod, then testing to make sure they're going the right direction, and then installing the control rod again. It's a glorious moment when you have the receiver all plugged in, powered up, and things start working. It's pretty cool. A lot of things we need to do prior to that, but let's go into the whole process of getting that receiver attached to the fuselage. That receiver's got to go somewhere, and even when you have a big pile of wires all over the place, that receiver's got to go places, and it has to be installed in a way that it's not going to move, especially if it has a gyro. Using this 3M VHB tape is amazing stuff. It's the best there is. But you do need to find a location to get that put in there, installed, and then route the antennas so they're not in the way of batteries or ESCs or things like that. A critical part of setting up your plane is your control throws. The documentation clearly states what their control throws or the optimal control throws. Start with that. And using this gauge here will enable you to set that accordingly. Of course, you could use a ruler. I like using this gauge. That's kind of my tip for this. During the setup process, and you realize you need to change the mechanical throws. So you're going to move the control rod from an outer hole into an inner hole for whatever reason. The holes, sometimes when they come out of the factory, they'd pre-drill a hole for where they're putting that control rod. So you are going to have to pre-drill the servo arm in order for things to work properly. That's where the cool little mini drill comes into play. The documentation gives you a good starting point for your center of gravity. You measure it on the wing, you find that location, you balance the plane, and you go fly. Then you might need to make some changes. However, there are some planes that moving the battery fore and aft isn't enough, and you need to add some lead weight. I typically will put the weight in a location where no one can see it, like in the nozzle of the EDF, or in the cowl, or embedded in the foam, something like that. It's assembled, it's set up. Let's talk about a few little final touches. These props typically aren't balanced very well. It's going to cause some vibration, and actually might mess up your motor a little bit if it's really bad. But for the most part, I throw these props on a Dubro prop balancer and test it. In this case, it's not right. So I use a small piece of electrical tape, cut it nice and clean, because eventually it's going to affix to the back, put it on the blade that's light, and test it again. Move it out to the tip, and test it again. Move it again and test it, and I continue to do that until I can get it to that point where it's nice, clean, and balanced. Then I take the tape and I put it basically on the prop so it's not seen, and I really make sure it's adhered very well. And that's it. So you're going to swap out the tires, stock tires, for something else, like these Dubros here. But sometimes you're going to notice that the axle that's on the plane, it's too loose. This tire, the hole is too big. That's where these chunks of brass come in handy. Here we have a brass tubing, and it just so happens that brass tubing fits in there pretty well. So it's a trick, it's a game. I've got several different sizes, I've got different wall thicknesses, and to find the one that matches, and where you can say, okay, this actually fits inside the wheel, and this slides over the existing axle. Then what I do is I mark it, I chuck it in my drill, and there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can probably use a Dremel tool to do this as well. But this is the crazy way I do it. Take a hobby knife, utility knife, and like so, and voila, got a nice clean cut piece of tubing. Anyway, thought you might be interested in how I swap those out when you get frustrated that they don't match up with your axle. Having a wide assortment of wheel collars is awful handy. Another thing I really like doing is cleaning up the mess inside the battery compartment. When you get the planes, there's wires all over the place. They're labeled usually, but for me, keeping the wires out of the way when I'm putting in the battery, or just, to me, it's a tidiness thing. I don't know.
But I do think that having it more orderly reduces chances of pulling out a servo wire or something happened during the battery transfer. Here's a couple examples of what I do to tidy it up, like using zip ties. Let me show you what I do with that, because it's kind of a neat trick. Often I'm using these zip ties to tidy up things, but I'm also using it to connect those, or basically glue that tab that I just cut off into the foam with just a little dab of adhesive and shove it in the foam and it sticks. I also use that adhesive to just, glue some of the wires where they need to go and stay there. Some planes get a little bit more tidy treatment than others, like my Extreme Flight Laser here, where all the cables are zip tied, everything is secured. This plane's flipping around and doing all kinds of stuff, so you definitely want to make sure you're not getting some cables pulled out. And I do that with, obviously, the zip ties and such, as well as the battery plugs. So just a lot of detail inside some of these planes. Just one more example. Here is my Avio Super Tucano. I have a baggie full of all of the screws that I use for assembly. And again, here is where I cover up all the cables with cable coverings, as well as zip tie the heck out of everything and route cables in a nice clean way. Planes with Velcro, I gotta say that typically the stock or the factory installed Velcro, it pulls up after a battery warms up. They just pull out and it's frustrating. So what I typically do is remove all of that material. I pull out the strap, the Velcro, and then I prep where the Velcro is going to go. And I use a decent adhesive. In this case, I've got some Gorilla Glue Clear, which is similar to E6000, which is similar to shoe goo. Apply that, let it tack up for several minutes, and then I put the Velcro down on top of that. Man, it is locked down forever. Not a huge fan of Velcro, but sometimes you got to use it. I typically will use this shelf liner and glue that down with a foam tack or some other kind of adhesive. Many planes require you to have screws or clips or things handy for assembly, and I keep all those in a box or a Ziploc bag. I know there was a lot of details in there, and making this video takes hours and hours of time to assemble the video itself of all the different tips and tricks and things that I could think of. And I'm sure I missed a couple things. No doubt I did. Anyway, if you have any additional tips you want to share, please leave a comment, hit that like button. And again, all the pieces and parts and links to those are in the description below. Appreciate that. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.